Good morning. Okay, good morning, everyone. Greetings from South Korea to everyone who is joining us remotely today. So let's get started to this second and last day of the GPIC. Thank you very much to the panelists joining us today. So let's get started. So it's 9 and 10 a.m. here in South Korea. I would really like to welcome everyone to this session. It's called Supporting Sustainable Oceans and Nature-Based Solutions. We've got participants also joining us today remotely. So let's get started. My name is Veronica Galmez, and I will be moderating today's session. So firstly, I really want to thank you all for joining us today. I believe that this is such an important session to really try to re-energize action for defining joint strategies to mobilize private investment for these traditionally challenging sectors through innovative financing and business models. What has really been an inspiration for this session is the momentum that is building around the global biodiversity agenda. As you may know, the 15th conference of the parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, or COP15, to take place in Canada in December 2022, will basically focus on actions and finance to protect nature and halt biodiversity loss, as well as on agreeing on an ambitious global biodiversity framework. And this includes the recognition of ambitious targets, such as conserving 30% of lands and oceans by 2030. The GCF recognizes, the Green Climate Fund recognizes and acknowledges the importance of climate nature nexus and has given nature a high profile by including ecosystems and ecosystem services as one of the 8 result areas, one of the 8 sectors of the fund, and by approving more than $1 billion in projects and programs related to conserving, restoring, and sustainably managing ecosystems and ecosystem services to enhance the adaptation and mitigation impact potential. What I think is particularly promising is also the traction that we are getting from the investors community, as it really makes progress in finding innovative ways to catalyze finance for nature-based solutions. So far, and as we all know, domestic public expenditures remain by far the largest source of nature-based solutions finance, and investments in sustainable supply chains and impact investing represent some of the main corporate investments from the private sector. Overall, we know that nature continues to be undervalued, unfortunately, in the financial and economic systems, and that financial markets must account for and also invest in nature, while we all try to close this intention action gap. We are really excited today to bring together a group of experts, not only experts, but also change makers who are really moving the needle in nature investment and practice. We really look forward to hearing on their insights to bring scale to some of the solutions that will be presented today and to reach ambition needed by 2030. So today's session will last 90 minutes, and we aim to have a panel discussion and some presentations from 4 wonderful guests, Renee, Thorsten, Benedict, and Anton. Thank you very much for being with us today. Now, to kick us off, we are going to hear first from Renee Gonzalez, who leads one of GCF's direct access entities and one of the leading organizations in Mexico financing the implementation of conservation initiatives, the Mexican Fund for Nature Conservation. Bienvenida, Renee.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, everybody. Very excited to be here. And I'm going to talk about a new, sort of array of different issues that we have been dealing with, especially financial mechanisms. If I could have the slides, I think that would be great.
Thank you very much, Renee. If you could maybe, we can start. If you can maybe please present what are the most innovative solutions that are being put in place also in coastal and marine areas based on FMCN's experience and in Mexico to really tackle this dual challenge, right, between biodiversity degradation and climate change impacts. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much. So if I could have the next slide, I think. No, yeah. Great. So the Mexican Fund for the Conservation of Nature, it's a national environmental fund. We are one of 110 environmental funds worldwide. In the Latin American and Caribbean region, the network encompasses 28 environmental funds from 21 countries. The next slide, please. So over the years, we have channeled to the field $195 million, and that has impacted 79,000 people directly with their families. And we actually have as a mission to work with people in the field to change things. And so we have supported 340 species that are endangered and through more than 2,000 grants. Thank you. Next one. Yeah, there we go. Oh, great. Thank you. And we can see here the case of Cabo Pulmo. Cabo Pulmo is a marine park that it's like between Cabo San Lucas. I'm sure that a lot of you probably have gone there for vacation. And close to it, about 15 years ago, a family of fishermen decided to actually set aside a no-take zone. 15 years later, thanks to this very courageous decision by the community, the population in this area has actually increased rapidly. Nature has responded. We have actually recorded 21% increase in species, 166% in density. This is what the researchers like Octavio Aburto report. And we have a 400% increase in the biomass. So if you let nature take care of itself, then it will grow and it will really astonish you. This actually has a spillover effect. And the fishermen are really seeing this because now outside of the no-take zone, the catch has actually increased. So this is a very successful story. And it actually is bringing a lot of revenues to the people because a lot of people go there to do snorkeling and scuba diving. It's one of the spots to actually go to. So it's a successful story that we want to scale up. Another area that a lot of you will probably know is the Yucatan Peninsula. And the Yucatan Peninsula in the Caribbean, in 11 years, there's been 17 no-take zones that have been established. In these 17 no-take zones, 18,000 hectares actually are protected from no fishing. It's also no-take zones. And these have been set by the fishermen and fish people themselves. So the communities have actually decided what has to be done. And by doing that, it's like absolutely incredible that you actually have over 11 years, 52% increase in the biomass. Now, one thing to actually keep in mind, and I'll just like give you that idea as an ecologist, is that these ecosystems, especially the marine ones, even though they are one of the most impacted by climate change and overfishing, they're also the ones that respond really fast. Fish are what ecologists name our selected species, and they actually can bounce back very quickly if just given a chance. So in order, we have to actually move to get the 30% of the planet protected somehow, because we really depend on the ecosystem services that these areas provide. So we are actually having some effect on 5% of the terrestrial part of the country through our investments, and also 5% in the marine area. But I want to assure you that we're not alone. This is really a collaborative effort. It's an ecosystem of institutions. And this changes like the ones that you saw, it's not the Mexican Fund, it's many, many institutions together, government, academia, all the NGOs, the communities themselves taking the lead to actually make a change. And so if you just map out the 28 projects that are taking place in the Yucatan Peninsula, you will see that they actually have a lot of linking potential, and that can actually make a change much faster and at a larger scale. In the center, you will see the Acción project. That's a project that is now the preparation for this project is being funded by the Green Climate Fund. And so that's why we put it in the center, because we are focusing on this one. And, you can see the links as the circles get bigger, the links are actually less direct. So in the first circle, you will see those projects funded by many different organizations that actually can have a very close link, and you have to ensure collaboration because that is the only way that we see in order to have scale. So the idea is to actually work on this ecosystem and actually make sure that the alignment of investments bring up speed and bring up scale. Thank you.
Many thanks, Rene. Wonderful to hear about the role that this ecosystem of financial and technical institutions played for financing effective management of protected areas. And of course, these examples that were presented today also show us how management and conservation agreements can actually contribute to the sustainable recovery of key productive activities such as artisanal fisheries, while also adapting to the new climate conditions. Thank you very much for that. Now, Torsten, you are our second panelist today. Welcome, and thank you for being with us. Torsten Thiele is the founder of the Global Ocean Trust, which is an organization that promotes new sources of finance to address key marine conservation challenges. Torsten, oceans seem to be very undervalued asset compared to conservation efforts around other terrestrial natural capital. Could you please tell us how public and private finance can help improve sea health and functionality under a new blue economy?
Thank you very much, and good morning. I think the challenge we have is that we've heard already how important and how valuable these systems are and how conservation works. But in order to turn this into a financial narrative, we need a number of additional steps. And the first step is really about finding ways to value. And in the marine space, I'm talking about blue natural capital. So the first starting point is not to just think about an individual ecosystem service, but really about the integrity of the asset as a whole. And therefore, the multiple benefits that come from conservation that link to climate resilience, that link to the whole host of benefits that come from this valuation process. So valuing blue natural capital is something that is happening. We fortunately now have a whole range of actors, of countries, of institutions who have started to look at that space. But the entry point has still been a traditional accounting entry point, where you start to value services that have, for instance, in the fisheries space, a direct cash flow number. So I think the important thing about valuing is to do this more holistically and look at more broadly the range of benefits that come out of that. So this is an ongoing movement. We need these types of economics, and it's happening. The second step then is to think about investment principles, and that means we need to have standards and pathways. And setting standards is so crucial, because only when we do the interventions correctly in a way that is aligned with science and nature do we get to this nature positive tipping point that we need to get to. So that's, again, a very active field at the moment. We have a whole range of institutions, efforts involved in this process, and the integrity of these standards is key. Thirdly, we need to take that, the economic understanding and then the investment principles, and turn it into a narrative that is actually accessible to countries and private investors. And that narrative is what I call the sustainable blue economy narrative. And it's important to understand that it is a narrative. It's not just about identifying that there are certain actions of economic benefit in the marine space. It's about understanding that living with nature in coastal environments is a huge opportunity for long-term development that is sustainable. And therefore, when we wrote, for instance, the sustainable blue economy financing principles, we said we need to set these principles inside the green climate transition world. So the first 7 of these principles are really a short version of what the green principles already are. So we are not scaring investors. We are reinforcing that blue investment is aligned with green. But then we said there are certain specificities. There's certain areas where we know even less in the blue world, where the connectivities are even more important. That mean that we have to be even more specific. So the second 7 principles very much focus on that. And so I highly encourage you to look into that. And working with that, a number of countries now, from the Seychelles to Mauritius to a whole range of other countries, have picked up on this thinking. And we have a whole range of investors very keen to come in along that concept. Now, that then means you need to then identify the types of innovations, technologies, and multi revenue streams that actually make these investments work. Because you invest into an asset, you follow clear principles, but you do have to have these revenues. And the innovation and technology is a lot about changing the cost structures, not looking at traditional costs of conservation and restoration, but figuring out how to do this new and differently. And this is, again, one of the many benefits of engaging more actively in that space with private investors, with startups, with scientists, and the spaces where there is a lot of innovation going on. And then the next step is to say climate dynamics in this coastal and context mean that it is actually quite difficult to make long-term, more traditional investment decisions. Now, as it turns out, nature is very good at dealing with change. Mangroves move up and down the coast when the sea level rises. So finding solutions that work with nature is actually a way to reduce the financial risks of the project and encourage the resilience. So this nature-based solutions approach is a holistic way to deal with this. So with IUCN, we a few years ago launched the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility, which provides grants in coastal settings to exactly work around that. And I'd encourage you to have a look at the website. We have had in a number of years the first set of successful projects. We're now working with the Blue Climate Accelerator Fund to do further projects in particular in the blue carbon space. So these are all helpful examples to show how it can be done and how you get bankable projects that are actually accessible to private investors to come in alongside. And I call this public-private investment pathways because the huge benefit of the private sector is the effectiveness of the capital markets as a fundraising process. But those funds need to be channeled into the space that we just described. And there's a key role for multilateral development banks to build this type of blue infrastructure projects and coastscapes and bring in the blended finance context, these additional larger investors. But also we need to de-risk those people that already, from an impact perspective, are very active in the space. So we have private sector impact funds that need de-risking to deal with all the other types of issues. They are very good at assessing the project risks itself, but they need help on some of the other issues. And we need early stage project support. So a second example I want to mention is the work we're doing with the Ocean Risk Resilience Action Alliance, which encompasses now 50 different players, including very large financial institutions, to think about impact finance using concepts such as a blue resilience hub that works with the projects itself, working on a finance umbrella for large scale investment, but importantly, using tools from the insurance world in a risk transfer platform to help identify ecosystem type assets, such like reefs, and think about insurance solutions to help make the investment pathway possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thorsten. It's really inspiring to hear how the Global Ocean Trust is working together with other institutions and you're bringing the private sector into action for ocean-related commitments. It's also interesting to hear the role that private finance can play to reach the resource mobilization ambition towards COP15 in December and beyond, and including discussions about having a more solid concept around marine protected areas, effective management of marine protected areas, including the principles that you mentioned. Torsten, you also mentioned the importance of having de-risking partners as well as early stage project support. And this is definitely where GCF has a role to play. We can continue discussing about the importance of nature positive businesses and how can we actually keep track of those investments. Thank you very much for that. Today's session is also about how to get nature on the private investment agenda, and this brings to our attention not only the ocean-based ecosystems, but also forests and freshwater ecosystems. And we have Anton today. Anton Willems leads the Peruvian Trust Fund for National Parks and Protected Areas, Profonampe, which is GCF's direct access entity that actually brought the first ever approved project by the GCF board many years ago. Thank you, Anton, for being with us today. Anton, could you please tell us what is Profonampe's investment philosophy and what is the financing gap you're seeking to fill for large-scale conservation of terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems?
Thank you, Veronica, and good morning to all of you. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about Profonampe. As René mentioned before, Profonampe is also an environmental trust fund created almost 30 years ago in Peru. And we have a purpose of promoting the sustainability of life by connecting humanity with the environment, because you need to involve more the people, caring about the people, and these different frameworks and regulations that are set up at different levels. We more and more are forgetting what for the rules are. The rules are for improving the quality of life of people and making that this quality of life is sustainable over time. As Fondo Mexicano, we are also a founding partner of REDLAC. REDLAC is this regional environmental trust funds in Latin America and Caribes. And also we are a direct access entity for the GCF and the Adaptation Fund. And finally, one of the things that we have been doing from this learning experience working with GCF is becoming a delivery partner supporting the accreditation process for, in this case, the Peruvian Development Bank. So our investment philosophy has to make with the intention of Profonampe to become the reference partner in Latin America in the implementation of the environmental agenda. The environmental agenda has evolved over time. When we were founded 30 years ago, it was very much focused on protected areas and trying to avoid degradation of these specific territories. But nowadays, when you speak about the environmental agenda, it's a cross-cutting all the economy. So you are not only speaking of biodiversity, but you are also speaking about changing of energetic metrics, sustainable cities, and other things. And in this role, our investment philosophy also aims to be a community connector. What does it mean? These days, it's difficult to traduce the language of the investment of the aims of the policy and what the people really cares of. And being a kind of translator between the climate language and what the society on the territory requires is one of our roles, and also working in this translation with the financial sector and entrepreneurs, because the understanding of entrepreneurs is evolving. We are not only looking at the entrepreneurs as financially sustainable business, but also with a social and an environmental impact. And at the same point, one of the things that we have seen and we need to do more, and that's one of our roles, is to establish financial products and develop projects. Because in the end, you need bankable projects or attractive projects for the different type of financiers that are appearing in the environment and in the context. No, and so one of the topics mentioned before by a colleague in this panel is about innovation. No, and when we speak about innovation, it's the need of increasing the level of financial flows. No, from the banking sector, from the microcredit sector, the insurance and investment, and also from the public sector to not-for-profit sectors necessarily, because in the end, we all work together to have a sustainable environment, and these priorities are not only for the companies or not only for the government, but for all of us. And in this work, we are looking after the development of thematic bonds. We have been very aware of the evolution of thematic bonds in different regions in the world. We have seen some very interesting things that are done in Africa with the Rhino bonds and things like that. And we are thinking with our colleagues in the Peruvian government, but also with the financial system in Peru, how that can be developed. At the same time, you have like these smaller financial products, and there we are in a learning process, or better said, in a co-creation process with a local financial institution to make them share the benefits of the credits towards conservation. This is involving a financial institution to reduce the amount of interest that they are expecting, and using this spread, this mini spread or internal spread, to allocate those resources to conservation and preservation. No, and at the same, also when you are speaking about innovation and green financing, we need to see the conditions that are compatible with the investment needs. For instance, we are seeing biobusiness, and we will speak about that later on in this panel. But there is a huge heterogeneity between the typical clients for financial instruments. So you cannot assess them with the same rules. And there is also a work. And also in the creation of markets and financial instruments. That's in the same page. No? And finally, something that we are exploring, and actually that's one of the trends also of working with the smaller institutions like Profonampe or perhaps Fondo Mexicano, is that we are more open to take risks and see innovative solutions. We are speaking about the possibility of tokenization of the protected areas, because the metaverse is one of these things that we really don't know, and probably there will be some interesting opportunities there, and also with crowdfunding and involving the citizens in contributing to the sustainability. So what are we seeking to fulfill in this large scale conservation of terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems? We are trying to fill a financial gap. No, we see that there are gaps regarding the sorry for my English. I am Spanish speaking by mother language, but prioritized mitigation and adaptation in measures related to the NDCs in the country. So in the case of Peru, we have more than 40 adaptations NDC and more than 60 mitigation NDCs. And there you see in the different sectors, not only from the public sector, but also from the private sector, the need to get financing for this. We also have a lot of requirements of funding for the mitigation gap. And there we are speaking about in the particular case of forest and RED Plus in the implementation phase and the results-based payment. So you see that we need to allocate more resources to this sector. And also when you are speaking about protected areas, protected areas are becoming kind of sanctuaries of our biodiversity, and they are suffering a lot of, they are facing a lot of challenges to keep the protected area in a good condition. And there, particularly the Amazonian region and the Andes region in Peru is very important. No? And then going on a little bit, we have also these opportunities in circular and regenerative economy. These are things that in Peru and in countries like Peru are becoming more necessary because we need to reuse and make a better use of our resources and trying to generate more incomes about that. So I think with that, Veronica, we are facing in general as institutions a lot of challenges, but the good thing is that there is we are forming or we are creating an alliance of the good ones, and the good ones have different scales, different roles, and institutions like Profonampe are playing and will continue playing an important role to help to traduce the international and the national policies into effective and results on the ground.
Thank you very much, Anton. Muchas gracias. It's very interesting to hear about the role of Profonampe to really try to connect, right? You mentioned the importance of connection of the financial sector with entrepreneurs that are really innovating the way business models are developed with positive impacts for nature conservation, especially for large scale biomes such as the Amazon. You also important and highlighted the relevance of translation, the translation between the financial sector and the conservation sector, which is much needed, and the importance of these co-creation processes. And we are more than happy to continue co-creating with you, Anton. Now, bringing scale and depth is also about how to realign and to reorient finance. And in the agriculture and land use area, this includes targeting those drivers that are leading to ecosystem degradation and ecosystem loss. Now, Benedict is our fourth panelist today. Benedict Libanda, he's the head of the Environmental Investment Fund of Namibia. Welcome, Benedict. This organization has the mandate of being a sustainable source of funding for the development and implementation of projects in partnership with both public and private sectors in Africa. Benedict, the Environmental Investment Fund of Namibia has identified a growing demand for ecosystem-based adaptation, EBA. These EBA investments in the country and the whole region. Could you please tell us what is the fund, what the fund is currently doing in this endeavor, and the role of microfinancing for ecosystem-based adaptation sustainability?
Yeah, thank you very much, Veronica, for this opportunity. The Environmental Investment Fund of Namibia is a state-owned enterprise that is fully owned by the government of Namibia. Our role is to structure and design innovative financing for biodiversity conservation, climate change adaptation, as well as to some extent, in mitigation. So we've got a broad spectrum of partners, ranging from multilateral environmental funds, international DFIs, regional DFIs, private sector, as well as grant-making, institutions. I think as a start, just to introduce where Namibia is and the structure of the country. We're about 825,000 square kilometers with 2.5 million people residing in that country. So we are the least densely populated country on earth. If you look at the numbers, we are a hyper and semi-arid country. 90% of the country is dry, not suitable for conventional agriculture. Only 10% could be used for crop farming. So that is how acute the country is when it comes to dryness as well as the risk to climate change. So as an introduction, what we've done is to introduce concessional financing as a tool for sustainable investments, and that covers two forms of financing that we've tested. Is the Environmental Investment Fund of Namibia. One was a dedicated credit line that we partnered with the French Development Agency, which is the SUNREF program, mainly targeting small scale projects that are of commercial viable in the space of ecosystem-based adaptation, as well as covering renewable energy projects. The size of that project was $46 million US. I'll go down in details on each of the case study. Then we've piloted a micro lending, mainly looking at the most vulnerable farmers in the country, with interest in upscaling the micro farming activities to commercial level, and filling the gap that is not covered by the private sectors. So we've learned a lot from those two pilots and two approaches, which are totally different in their nature. If we look at the case one with the SUNREF program, I think there are very key lessons that we took from this. The SUNREF program was a 46 million euro program combined. 45 million of that was channeled and deployed through 3 participating banks. That was Bank Windhoek, FNB, and Nedbank. And 1 million of that was used as to support the technical assistance facility. That is early stage support to project, ensuring that project preparation improved up, and reach bankability, making sure that technical support is provided through grant funding of that using of that $1 million US, euro. So under that project, it closed this year in March. We had 16 projects financed in the area of really renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, as well as nature-based tourism, looking at non-consumptive tourism activities within Namibia. Just an example of one of the projects that was financed by the SUNREF program is a climate resilient hydroponic system, which is quite a very interesting project in terms of water saving, in terms of less utilization of land coverage, as well as based on organic production systems. If you look at it, these projects, fits well within the ecosystem-based adaptation. Converting arable land to be so productive in terms of sustainable agricultural production. If you also look at the investment guidelines and philosophy of it, is that it was prime minus 5.2% in terms of funding structure. long repayment of 10 years. There was a grace period of 12 months just to have this project, up and running. Then under the example of the micro lending activities is that we financed organic farming. This is organic fertilizers being produced from chicken manure. Almost 100% organic. It's processed and treated and enters the formal market. The structure of this small grant was small loan, actually not grant, was about 400,000 USD, mainly supporting crop farmers, targeting those farmers around the country. The business has got the capacity to produce 400 tons of organic fertilizers a month. That is a high yielding business, promoting, carbon soil content, within the agricultural space. Again, a good fit for ecosystem-based, financing in terms of nature-based solution. The lessons that we have learned so far is that green financing products, face multiple risks. As a result, we need to have a low asset base for security and collateral. The micro lending products did not have collateral at all. So the non-performing rate was extremely high at 30%. So we have learned some lessons from that. And the solution is that blended financing is recommended as a tool to de-risk these projects and attract private capital, where we use public capital to tactically, address all the risk at early stage, and they make such projects bankable. And then the technical assistance facility, just like the one which was used under the SunRef program for the private banks, proved to be extremely important in improving the credit quality of the projects, as well as de-risking the projects to bankability. Strategic partnership is also came up as a very important in our financing model, that instead of EIF as an entity to also advance deploy loans, perhaps we partner with specialized lending entities in order to be effective and efficient in our products. So in October next month, we are launching a new blended financing for green credit line, still targeting ecosystem-based adaptation and nature-based solution for the private sector. So now we have structured differently from the lessons that we learned, is that we will provide the capital of 10 million US dollars to the private sector through specialized fund managers. And the idea is that it is at highly concessional rates, prime minus 6% of the fees, and that will be able to leverage private sector funding by a factor of 4. So 10 million will become about 40 million within a space of 3 years. 2, because it will be able to de-risk the private capital and managed by specialized fund managers. But most importantly, there will be a technical assistance facility for the fund managers to help them with the project pipeline, to ensure that all these projects that will be supported and financed a financial, decision, final investment decision complies with the principles of EBA, complies with the principle of nature-based results that we are looking at. And that facility will be used to support, to support technical assistance, such as for that of consultants, financial modeling, taking EIAs, of promising projects, and then getting them across to bankability. What is emerging from this is that because it's a blended financing platform and we've tested and sounded the market, we are expecting an additional $50 million to be deposited in that facility, mainly from our multilateral development partners. And as such, a project, the GCF, is being currently designed, and by Q3 of 2023, we hope this will be in place to aid this blended platform that will be implemented as from next month. I think in a nutshell, that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Benedict. It's very interesting to hear about the role of local private banks, local financial institutions in providing sustainable capital for micro and small enterprises. And I would also like to highlight that of course, while most funding for ecosystem-based adaptation continues to stem from public budgets and international assistance, there are increasing opportunities to use microfinance to attract greater public and private investments, Benedict, as the approach that you presented. Now, Renee, I'd like to come back to you. During your first intervention, you mentioned very interesting solutions that could be ready to be upscaled if additional private finance is to be available. So what could be the role of the GCF to really try to make these solutions bankable and to mobilize finance at scale?
Thank you, Veronica. I'll share with you a few thoughts on that role. And so we'll just go into a little bit of the investment, different mechanisms that we've seen.
I think we're just waiting a couple of seconds for the slides to be pulled up.
And it's basically, just working on what the other panelists have presented, just, putting together different financial mechanisms at work, seizing the opportunity of what we see as increasing opportunities with the private sector. Let's see. Okay, so one of them is has already been presented by the previous panelist, is preparing the ground for impact investment. What we've seen in forestry community enterprises, where we actually work with other institutions to establish small loans to these enterprises, is that the technical assistance, which Namibia was presenting, is key. So, and what we learned through these 28 enterprises is that in order to access those loans, you actually have to prepare the ground, and that's where the grants come in. And what we also learned through the years is that it's not only providing the technical assistance in just short-term capacity building, but it's actually accompanying those enterprises through the time. So what we found were local organizations that could actually make sure that that learning process was incorporated into the everyday operation of all these enterprises. So that was very important. And what we learned after that is that once they access the loan, they actually paid them. And so these 28 enterprises had absolutely no problems with paying the loans. It was like, 0% problems with paying the loans back. So what also was important in that learning process is how the peer-to-peer exchange can actually accelerate the process. So you can bring a lot of like novelties and financial inclusion into the communities, but if you actually make them understand through peers, it accelerates the process. We have learning communities here. You can see the learning community that we have in fire brigades, where we actually have women participating. And then through the years, just this peer-to-peer actually allows you to have scale. So we think that for impact investment is also very important. Another area that we're seeing with increasing an increase in private investments are the carbon offsets. So what we're seeing there, we're trying to understand the ecosystem, but the voluntary carbon offsets, the voluntary markets, have many different players. They come from the buyers that go through brokers, and then they actually rely on developers to access the landowners, or mangrove owners, or whoever has in the land the different carbon expressions of nature. And so what happens there is that you create an asymmetry, because these developers actually speak the financial language and the landowners don't speak that language. So we actually see that we can actually work with grants to prepare the ground for those transactions, and actually deal with that asymmetry that is pretty evident in this voluntary carbon market that is just increasing and reaching all different areas of Mexico, where communities are signing contracts without knowing what they're signing. So it's very important that translation between the financial world and the communities that own the carbon is actually put in synchrony. One thing that we always think that is key is governance. If you have the landowners actually well organized in communities, and they actually have a good corporate system in terms of really understanding that they have to sign, and that actually entails a lot of commitments, and that they can plan the use of the funds once they come, then you are bound to be more successful in your projects. So we think that this hub hopefully will be very interesting, and that's where we hope that the Green Climate Fund can actually put these two worlds together, the world of what is nature-based solutions as we've done it in the past, which are through grants, with this new emerging carbon offset markets. So we hope that. And then finally, we come to another part, which is once the private sector comes in and they want to do impact investments and they want to do carbon offsets, the question that always comes is well, these areas are very vulnerable to climate change, right? So talking about the Yucatan Peninsula, you have hurricanes that will actually probably destroy in one day what you've been working on for years. So what the Nature Conservancy and also the Mesoamerican Refund have actually been creating in the last years is this parametric insurance. And so what happens is that the insurance is activated once the meteorological catastrophes reach a certain point. If the hurricane is a certain level, then the funds get actually immediately channeled. And that can actually provide some support to all these investors that are actually thinking about the impact investment and the carbon offsets. So we're looking in the project with the Green Climate Fund to see whether this insurance can actually be now focused on impact investments and also on carbon offsets. Let's see. And so the project that we have with the Green Climate Fund that we're just preparing right now, we're going to start doing all the studies for this, actually considers all these different investment in financial mechanisms. Grants to prepare the ground for carbon offsets and for impact investment, and that can actually help the restoration of different ecosystems. And then once that is already established, then the impact investors come with micro loans and also with the carbon offsets. So that's the idea. And of course, it has a very important component from learning community, because what we are seeing in the field today is that we have a lot of small projects that have been successful thanks to grants that were given in the 80s and 90s. But now that the financial sector is focusing on this, we actually require scale. And that scale and that speed will only be possible if we actually use grants to prepare these communities to actually have enterprises and have carbon offsets that can access these markets at that scale. And so in conclusion, we still need grants. The blended financing is very important to build the organizations. And we need to actually work on governance so that people can actually learn to plan ahead, and then when the funds come, use them in the long-term investment, so that what you have in nature-based solutions are actually long-term. And then this organization of different or communities can lead to networks. And as we saw in Alianza Canancay with the no-take zones, these networks actually can allow you to scale because you can aggregate. And once you start aggregating, then these local initiatives can reach a scale that becomes very interesting for the private sector. We don't know really how to do it at the scale that we need for the next 10 years, but these are the milestones and the lessons that we have learned through the last 28 years that we think will be the ingredients for success, hopefully. And partnerships are key to all this. So, there are many organizations that are working in the field, and we have to build those connections so that we create the links for all these financial mechanisms, and these institutional arrangements can then trigger the carbon offsets and the insurance and all the impact investment that will be required to actually have an impact at the scale and the time needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renee. Very interesting reflection on the role of partnerships, the aggregation and organization to bring scale. Carbon markets, yes, definitely it's an area where the GCF has more to explore. We all know that the global demand for voluntary carbon credits, including, of course, blue carbon, could actually increase by a factor of 15 by 2030. So the opportunities for considering carbon credits are enormous. Blue carbon, that's definitely an area where we are currently exploring now through our project with FMCN, Fondo Mexicano, in the peninsula of Yucatan, with support of PPF funds from the GCF. So thank you very much, Renee, for that. Thorsten, we'll come back to you again. Earlier this year, during the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon, some governments made ambitious announcements related to the issuance of blue bonds as an appropriate and adequate instrument for debt financing. So based on the experience that you have at Global Ocean Trust, how to ensure that this critical additionality of the bond proceeds to support an effective blue bond performance?
Thank you very much. And this takes me back to my first job in finance. I started at JP Morgan a long time ago, working on new capital markets instruments, i.e. new forms of bonds, etc. And I think the key lesson from that time is still the key lesson as we explore these new instruments. The capital market is the largest, most effective, most efficient source of funds. It's all about the investor perspective in that market. So innovation means making slight changes to what is already a tried and trusted process. And I think that is really key as we explore how to build a solid, reliable blue bond space. And I think the starting point obviously had been very much the perspective of the issuer. So one aspect of the blue bond experience has been countries that came from high debt position and were willing to explore ways to reduce that debt through debt swap structures and engage in commitments in terms of marine protection, which was an excellent pathway to address that challenge. And we've seen from the Seychelles, from Belize, that has been an entry point. But as we look at the blue bond market in a broader sense, I think we do need to provide the existing large investor base opportunities and access to come into the ocean space in a structure and format that they are familiar with, so they can deliver these large benefits of the capital market space, which is its efficiency and therefore the price benefit that comes with it. And that price benefit we want to deliver to the projects on the ground, to the coastal and marine environment at competitive pricing. So therefore, we need to find ways to bundle themes and locations so we can get to the type of scale that is necessary to satisfy the needs of the investors. And that takes you then back to a lot of the things we've just heard around we need to develop projects and support them in their development. We need to find ways to actually create the partnerships and structures around them. And we need to have guidance and standards. So again, one of the starting points in developing the blue bond standards, to my mind, has to be that they are embedded in what we already have in the green climate bond space. So it's only if and when we are entirely certain that these formats are consistent that we can have a reliable base. So there's a lot of work going on around blue bonds at the moment, but I would argue that some of the application of capital markets products to traditional ocean industries that are trying to improve and become more climate aligned are really climate type financings and need to apply the same logic there. So it's some of it is transition funding, so we need to use the logic of transition bonds. Some of it is renewable industry funding in the marine context. It's still the same bond structures that we have with renewable projects on land. But then we have this core space of blue ecosystem finance, and that's where we need to put a lot of the energy in. So we need to use the linkages to the climate and sustainability finance world and structure and deliver the type of credit enhancements that allow us to bring in the projects that actually have the output and impact benefits on marine coastal ecosystems. So one of the first blue bond example that I thought is very helpful because it got delivered in rapid time with a whole range of partners around the table is the Baltic Blue Bond, because the realization was that the sea basin of the Baltic had been degraded through multiple impacts in various places. So you needed a whole range of projects all around the Baltic in terms of improvement of wastewater treatment, in terms of the way you handle coastal structures, all of that in multiple locations. And you needed a single entity that could provide the most efficient funding, but that would bring in these range of projects. And the great benefit of thinking of it in this group structure is that the places that probably have the highest needs and the toughest time at finding funding would get the greatest benefit from being part of that structure. And so that kind of grouping is one of the ways we can make these solid blue bonds. So it's a space that is emerging. There's a lot of opportunity there, but we can draw on the lessons that we already have in the green world, linking it with outputs and robust structures.
Thank you very much, Torsten. Extremely interesting blue bonds. And here, perhaps I just wanted to mention that, of course, the GCF offers highly concessional de-risking instruments, financial instruments, where, of course, the GCF resources can be used for de-risking of the policy environment for blue bond frameworks. You mentioned the standards and the principles, but also for project level de-risking through technical assistance. So GCF resources can also
can also act as actually co-financing at portfolio, but also at project levels. Financial de-risking at portfolio levels, for instance, through credit enhancement, or at project level for innovative business models. So very interesting and very well aligned to what we're thinking also for GCF2, our second programming period of the GCF. Anton, we go back to you. Thank you very much. So the public and private finance available for the effective management of the protected areas was, of course, enormously hit by COVID-19 due to the impact, especially on ecotourism, one of the main revenue sources for the protected areas. What are the opportunities that biobusinesses, you mentioned biobusinesses in the first round, what could actually these bring for sustainable financing, and what is the role of impact investment based on the theory of investment that Profonampe is leading?
Well, thank you again, Veronica. I think one of the things that we hear in the panel is that we are very much facing same constraints, you know, and also the same challenges, and that's the good thing of these networks and this aggregation of information that we can have. So when we see what COVID-19 provoked in the income of the people there in the different territories surrounding the protected areas, you see that you need to diversify. You need to diversify the sources of income for the people. No? And when we speak about biobusiness, we speak about 4 pillars that are necessary for that. No? The first is this, in the end, is a business. So it's an industry, so they need to be competitive, and being competitive means that they have to manage the resources on a sustainable way, getting the raw materials, processing them, trying to be as cost efficient as they can, and also trying to maximize the profitability of the biobusiness. But again, you need to see this profitability with different aspects, not only on the finance aspects, it's probably the key, but also on social and environmental aspects. No, the other thing that we have seen is that the ecosystems are diverse and resilient. As mentioned by René previously, once you take care of an ecosystem and you protect it, it doesn't take too much time to become again a hub of biodiversity, and shows that nature is resilient in itself. What we need is to accommodate the way that we work in this environment to make it sustainable over time. And the 4th pillar is related to inclusive economic development. Again, COVID-19 showed that those most affected by the pandemic were the ones with the less income. So if we don't take care of them, what they will do is have a lot of pressure to degrade the ecosystems, make another type of use of the land, of the forest, and that will cause a huge impact, not only in their future, but also in the people from other places integrated with these regions. No? So what we have been working in Profonampe is also what has been mentioned before here in the panel, and that's a facility for eco-biobusiness. This facility is trying to fulfill or trying to create the entire ecosystem of financing that this biobusiness require. And what we see in businesses, it doesn't matter in what sector, if it's technological or bio or normal business, all the entrepreneurs face the same debt valley and face the same constraints in order to be market profitable. So one thing that we are looking very much is technical assistance, and I have heard it here in the panel consistently, and that's because we need to translate, we need to transmit the capacities to the different type of users of the financial resources. And there, the role of institutions like Profonampe is key, and as Profonampe, other organizations. And we as organizations that are worried by, from the very beginning, worried to make this world sustainable, are a trusted partner for private investors, because we can work in a blended way of working, providing some of the services that normally the private sector is not willing or not necessarily doing. And that's one way of doing. The other thing is acceleration. So what you see on the ground is that entrepreneurs and small developments are also very solidary among them. So this solidarity, you can see it in microcredits. The scale of microcredits is very small, but the hypothesis behind it is that all the users of the microcredits are willing to repay in order to sustain their credit rating and also to sharing the benefits. And that's something that we, with this biobusiness facility, are trying to test on another way. It's not a loan, but it's a reimbursable grant. So this means, in the end, if we can make this community of businesses that are caring for their neighborhood, for their ecosystems and for their people, they are willing to share this prosperity to others. And that's the reason why we are also working in the acceleration phases with reimbursable grants. And finally, working on innovation and networking, because connecting, making the connections is a key element. And again, I take the conclusion from Rene, you need to connect, you need to make these networks that allows to find and discover this type of biobusiness that are really doing amazing things using the same rules that others, where others fail, no? And that's because they have this commitment to what they do. And what's the role of the impact investment in this case is that we can have this positive impact on cost effectiveness of social, environmental, and economics impacts. No? So again, in the end, every business should be profitable, but if you measure them not only on the economic side, but also on the social and environmental side, then probably the interest that you charge, that the financial system will charge these entrepreneurs, should be lower. No, the other thing is empowering vulnerable populations, and also promote what's something that the GCF requires from DICE as direct access entities like Profonampe, Fondo Mexicano, and others, is this gender equitable and also inclusiveness of the local people. So this is something that impact investors like Profonampe and the partners of Profonampe are looking for. And finally, also enabling the monetization of ecosystem services, because most of the people take for granted the ecosystems in where they live, but preserving them normally makes that some groups of the society are less benefited than others. And that's the reason why we need to be more capable to monetize these ecosystem services and translate the resources from those who are using it in surplus to those who are providing it. And then looking a little bit at the way forward, one of the key elements is knowledge exchange and strategic partnerships. Again, this is a common message that you will hear in different places, but we can make a broader impact if we go to the basis, if we go to the ground, to the territories, and share the knowledge, reduce the apprenticeship curve, and make things happen faster, because we hear all the time and we see all the time that we don't have time, and we need to make the extra mile of reaching others and trying to make these partnerships and share the knowledge. The other thing that we are looking very much is analyzing and research to identify areas of particular positions of strength. Again, you don't need to restart every time that you go to a certain place. A lot of things have already been done, and making use of this knowledge and also building on solid bases that already have been tested is a good way of moving forward. And finally, redefining, or better said, giving the insights and promoting better public policies. We have heard the previous days here in the GCF program in the last 3 days, we have been hearing that GCF promotes country ownership. So if we are promoting country ownership, what we need is that the public policies in the countries need to reflect these change of trends, these necessities, because as Renee mentioned, for instance, the voluntary market of carbon is forest carbon is like starting to boom in different regions. But what we see is that the regulation in the different countries are not evolving at the same time. And again, the market is the best way to share the risks, but those with privileged information will make a better use of those knowledge and make a better profit. But when we are speaking about climatic impact, you can't have winners and losers. We all have to share the risk. We all have to share the benefits, because we can't leave this planet. So actually, I think one final message about Profonampe and the other partners that you will see, and therefore it's so important that we participate also in these spaces, and we are glad to be here, is that you need honest brokers. And these honest brokers has to be recognized by the local people, has to be recognized by local authorities, and also has to be recognized by the private sector. And institutions like Profonampe are happy to be this honest broker that can bring and allocate more and better resources to really make an impact in livelihoods for all, for all the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anton. Very interesting statements. And I just wanted to share with you, definitely at GCF, we are exploring innovative ways to use grant financing for nature-based solutions. We see that reimbursable grant mechanisms can actually accelerate the growth of the impact investment community. And this becomes more relevant when we see many impact startups facing challenges to really try to ensure their bio businesses survive this valley of death, right? So how to mature, and definitely we see that GCF can have a role there. Now we go back to Benedict. It was very interesting to hear from you, and you presented these opportunities of blended finance for supporting bankable projects in the agriculture and food security value chains. And also you presented the importance of having this technical assistance arm aimed at increasing the quality of the portfolio. I was just wondering, how do you see this blended finance approach model that you're proposing to really try to overcome the barriers, right, for upscaling finance for ecosystem-based adaptation in these sectors?
I think the starting point is to recognize the challenge that is at hand, which is the majority, or which is more than 90% of our targeted clients resides in rural areas. And coincidentally, those are the biodiversity rich areas that are occupied by mainly small-scale farmers. And the biggest challenge is they're excluded from the formal financial sector, so they are not being services in terms of financial needs. And we heard again from a previous speaker that the imminent threat is overutilization of environmental products or assets, unsustainable utilization of natural resources, leading to undermining of continuous and maintenance of ecosystem services. So what we're doing now at the fund is that with the $10 million that will go through this blended structure, which will be used to de-risk private sector loans by working with two banks. Those are commercial banks, and there are two products also that will come with that $10 million to de-risk those micro lending facilities. That will be one on interest subsidies to make the loan affordable. The second one is more partial guarantee, which will also cover first loss for the bank, and those are the two main products that will be introduced on the market. But in the long term, as we crowd in, more grants and more participants on the blended financing platform, we are also looking at introducing a VC venture capital kind of approach in the second year is our target, where we mature these SMEs or micro lending entities to really play and be on their own after 4 years in terms of sustainable managing their enterprises. I think that's the ecosystem that we're working on in terms of the blended financing structure. It's a complicated structure because there'll be at least about 9 different, financiers that have been identified so far in terms of providing a seed capital for grant, providing on lending capital, as well as technical assistance capital. So altogether, we aim again just to reemphasize to about $70 million, within the end of the 3-year cycle of resource mobilization for this blended financing platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benedict. Been interesting. We've been told that there's another session actually starting in a couple of minutes. We're running a little bit late, but I would like to thank our wonderful guests today for having given us concrete examples, right, and how to bring scale to these efforts, and actually for confirming that nature can be an investable agenda. Now, today, of course, we've heard a number of concrete examples, as I mentioned, on how our economic systems and financial markets can account for and invest in nature. At GCF, we would like to see a growth in our portfolio of bankable projects in nature-based solutions, including models and approaches of nature-positive investment, as you mentioned, Torsten, in your first intervention, and a clear role of nature in net zero commitments. And this is something part of, this is going to be part of the discussions for COP15 and COP27 as well. So we're coming to the end of the session, and I would really like to thank you all very much for your interest and for your participation in this session and in the conference and all. Thank you very much again. Thanks.